So here we are on the Suspense panel slot of today's literary festival, and I am delighted to welcome to my screen, in no particular order other than the order that they are on my screen at the moment, Penny Batchelor, Philippa East, Emma Christie and Nicola Smith, who are going to tell us all about their particular books. So, just by way of introduction, Penny, whose book you can see there behind her, is the author of My Perfect Sister, which was longlisted for the Guardian Not the Booker Prize 2020. Philippa is the author of Safe and Sound. Emma has written The Silent Daughter, which was longlisted for the Crime Writers Association New Blood Dagger of this year, 2021. And Nikki is the author of All in Her Head and Look What You Made Me Do. And I am going to let everybody tell you all about their own books to start with. Who would like to go first? Let's go in the order that I introduced you. Why not? That seems reasonable, doesn't it? Penny, tell us all about My Perfect Sister.
Well, thank you for having me, Mark. And yes, I've got some shameless advertising here. I have put my book up there before when I've been doing panels and it's fallen on my head. So no doubt we can have a bit of a humorous interlude when that happens again. But yes, it's lovely to be here. My Perfect Sister is a domestic noir thriller, and it was first published, well, the only time it's been published, in May last year. Came out first in ebook and then a month later in paperback. And it's the story of Annie, who when she was 5, her 16-year-old older sister Gemma went missing, never came back from school. And this shrouded Annie's childhood. She leaves home as soon as she can. But when she's 30, lots of different circumstances conspire together for her to return to the childhood home that she really has been staying away from. And she decides that she is going to try and find out what did happen to Gemma, but is it safe for her to do so? I shall leave it there. And also just to say that my second novel, Her New Best Friend, another domestic noir thriller with lots of twists and turns, this time about motherhood, is, oh, I can see Philippa's cat there, sorry. It's coming out on August the 5th. So I hope you'll be getting it in there for your library, Mark.
I'm sure we will. In fact, My Perfect Sister arrived in our branch of the library service just this week and is currently available to loan from Crediton Library. So if you are local to Crediton Library and you want to read My Perfect Sister, then you can borrow it from us, because we have a very own bright, shiny new copy which arrived this week for that. Philippa, who is hosting the second Zoom cat of the day. We enjoyed Francis's cat on the historical fiction panel this morning, and that was a particularly particularly talkative cat. Philippa's appears to be a particularly massive cat, looking at the way that it just walked past the camera there. So do introduce us to the cat in due course if you want to, but in the meantime, tell us all about Safe and Sound.
Sure. Hi everybody, apologies for the cat invasion. She's actually a very small cat, but she managed to get so close up to the camera by trampling all over my keyboard that she made herself look humongous. Anyway, she's called Mimi. She's mostly nice, mostly naughty. So yeah, I'm Philippa East. As Mark said, my latest book is Safe and Sound, and it's the second book that I've written following my debut, which is Little White Lies. I'm trying to hold them up to the camera the right way. Little White Lies is a psychological suspense book about a family whose missing daughter is found alive and comes home 7 years after her abduction, and the book starts from there. And Safe and Sound, which, as Mark said, is the one that's out now, is also a psychological suspense. It's really a kind of psychological mystery, and it's about a young, pretty, charismatic woman who is found dead in her bedsit in South London. But the real mystery of the book, which the housing manager, Jen, tries to unravel, is how her death went completely unnoticed by anybody for 10 whole months. So that's me. Intriguing. And my cat.
There's a bit of a Father Ted moment there of thinking, like, this cat is close. This cat is far away. This cat is big.
This one is big. This one is close.
Emma, over to you in normally sunny but not quite so sunny today, Valencia. Tell us all about your book, The Silent Daughter.
Hi there, yeah, I'm Emma Christie, Scottish writer based in Barcelona, but this weekend I'm in Valencia. Apologies for the sound of espresso being made in the background. So my debut novel, The Silent Daughter, is based in Edinburgh, but it does also feature action in Spain. And it follows the trials and tribulations of a news reporter called Chris Morrison as he tries to track down his missing daughter Ruth. His daughter Ruth is a tour director, which is what my other job is. And I used to be a news reporter. So I've basically taken every job I've ever done and put them in my first book. and it's a psychological thriller as well, based mainly on the streets of Edinburgh.
Excellent, thank you. And Nikki, tell us about your books too, please.
Hi everybody, my name is Nikki Smith. 2 novels out. This was my debut. It's called All in Her Head, which has been optioned for TV. It's the story of 2 characters, Jack and Alison, who were once married. Alison is convinced that her ex-husband Jack is stalking her, but is that really what's going on, or is it just all in her head? And I'll leave that there and you can find out. And then my second novel, which came out in April, is called Look What You Made Me Do. It looks like that. And this is the story of the dark secrets that are hidden beneath the surface of a seemingly perfect family. It involves 2 sisters, Jo and Caroline, who are in their late 30s. And they've never really got on whilst they're growing up. And then suddenly their father dies and leaves his entire inheritance to Jo. So suddenly Jo has what Caroline wants, but the question is, how far will she go to get it?
Excellent, thank you very much. Thank you. I'd like to just start. Well, actually, I'm going to start by reminding people that if they want to ask any questions to any of these lovely authors in front of us here, to please just type them into the chat window at any point and I'll pick them up and we can ask people your questions, either in a group scenario here or individually. If you want to target a particular author about a particular thing, then please do so. I'd like to just explore a little bit about how you got into writing, particularly in this particular genre. We've heard actually from a few people today who've drawn on past experience. There's been a few journalists and a few reporters and other writers of other styles like that today as well. So let's start with you then, Emma. How did you make the move from that kind of journalism aspect and the other things that you were doing to suspense as a writing genre?
Well, I worked as a news reporter for 5 years on a daily paper in Scotland, and I worked on a lot of crime stories during that time. I was a court reporter, and I did a lot of out and about stories, with crime, with murders and such like. And I found it all very depressing, to be honest. I liked my job, but I realised that being a news reporter wasn't as creative as I'd hoped, and also, there really wasn't a very happy ending. So I tried to do some creative writing while I was working at the paper, but in the end it was far too difficult. And so in 2010, I decided to quit my job and take a year off to travel and try and write a novel. That 1 year turned into 10 years. And at the end of it, finally, I did get a book deal. And to be honest, I didn't intend to write psychological thrillers or crime or any sort of suspenseful book. I had thought that I was writing a literary novel, in fact. And when I found my agent and she took me on, and I was like, excellent. So what genre do I write in? And she's like, it's psychological suspense. are you sure? And I have to say, I was quite shocked when she told me that that's what I'd written, but she said that's definitely my natural style. It absolutely was not literary. And I think once I embraced that, I really enjoy it. And I'm working on my second psychological suspense book at the moment, which is going to be out in December. And it's a very different experience working on the second one, but it's definitely a genre that, so many themes we can explore, I think. And I think when I was a journalist, I often wondered, I would work on a murder case or a court story, and I would wonder what happens next to this family. Once the press have gone and once the doors are closed, what really happens in the relationships here? And I think that's something that I feel as a writer we can explore, that what happens next. Once the journalists leave and once you've got people dealing with the aftermath. So that's something that really draws me to this genre, I would say.
Philippa, and your cat that is not far away, or in fact it is far away now, but it wasn't before. What about you? How did you come to be writing in this particular style?
Yeah, I mean, maybe a little bit like Emma. I think I'm actually a clinical psychologist, and my day job, I work as a therapist. So a bit like Emma, I'm really interested in the people around the story and their relationships and the impact on them when really significant events happen, like a crime or a disappearance or a death, something like that. So I think I found that the psychological suspense genre is a way of presenting a really engaging novel that can be quite a page turner and have a strong plot, but that also allows you to explore some really interesting interpersonal or psychological themes. And for me, a big inspiration book for this genre is the absolute classic Gone Girl by Gillian Flynn, which took so many of the crime tropes and really used them to explore a really interesting idea around male-female relationships and couple relationships. And I think I sometimes consider myself, I get put in the crime genre, but I think of myself who writes one step to the side of a crime. Just as I say, looking at what happens when the police go away, what happens behind closed doors, what happens in the aftermath, how does this affect families and friends and relationships? So that's why I love the genre.
And there's a note in the chat there from Michelle, who's just replying to what Emma was saying just now, to say it's encouraging that you didn't know what to call your genre when you got an agent, because we're led to believe that you need to know so much about the business before you even start in the business. So yeah, that's a very good point, and not always the case. Penny, what about you? Why are you writing these style of books?
Well, I sort of semi fell into it. I'm a little bit of a cliche because I did a master's and an undergraduate degree in literature, wanted to write stories ever since I learned to write. And indeed, my parents, they moved house a couple of years ago, they downsized, and then they turned up at my house with this big box of my old schoolwork from first school. And they thought, right, we've got no room for this, here, have it. And in it, I must have been about 5, I'd written, my name is Penny, I want to be a writer, and I like fish and chips. And I still like those today. And then I got to about 40 and I thought, well, I'm making the classic mistake that I want to be a writer, but I'm not finishing anything. I'm writing loads of plot ideas and first chapters and things, but I'm not getting down to it. So I applied to the Faber Academy, writing a novel, the first 6 months course. And to apply, I had to send first chapter for a novel, and that was actually historical fiction. And when I got on the course, we had to come up with an idea for something that we hadn't started on already. And it just so happens that the idea for what became My Perfect Sister was the one I had. And I didn't know, I'd never heard of domestic noir before. I thought it was sort of, yes, a psychological thriller, but again, like the others, it's not the crime I'm so much interested in. It's the suspense. The crime is sort of the catalyst to see how all the characters react. And I really like exploring how ordinary people will do something that they never think that they would because of a certain chain of events. Anyway, so I was lucky enough to get that published, and publishers say once you're in a genre, you want to stick there for at least the first perhaps 4 or 5 books. So I have, but I've got ideas for other genres, particularly a psychological suspense historical thriller. So hopefully they're all stuck away on my laptop and in my head. So no doubt they will come out at some point when I've got time to write them.
I am sure they will. Nikki, what about you?
Well, I did an English literature degree at Birmingham University many years ago. And I wrote a novel after I left, actually, and it was pretty awful looking back. It's somewhere in my loft and it won't ever be coming out again. But I just kind of thought after that, because it didn't go anywhere, it didn't get taken on by, you know, an agent or published or anything. I just thought, well, that's, you know, it's not for me. I mean, I didn't know anyone in the industry. I didn't know how it worked. So I kind of gave up really at that point. And I still wrote stuff for me, but nothing that I showed people. And I went on to have a completely different career in finance, which was a little bit dull, I have to say, but you know, it paid the bills. And then again, like Penny, when I was kind of about 40, after I had, I've got 2 daughters and I'd had kids, I had somebody got in contact with me on Facebook who I used to go to school with. I hadn't seen her for 20 years, and she kind of said, how are you? And have you ever done anything with your writing? Because I still remember the stories that you used to read out at school. And that was a bit of a kind of now or never moment. And I just thought, well, if I don't try now, it's going to be kind of too late. So I signed up for a Curtis Brown course, actually. Interestingly, I know that Penny did the Faber one. And worked, it was a 3-month course online in the evenings, so I didn't have to go into London or anything because I still had a full-time job, and that's where I wrote the first draft, the very rough first draft of All in Her Head, and then worked on the book for basically about another, I don't know, 8 months or so before I submitted it to agents, and then was lucky enough to find the lovely Sophie Lambert at C&W agency, and again together for probably another 3 or 4 months, and then we submitted it to Orion, then I got my deal.
Excellent, thank you. It's a case, I think, with a lot of people, isn't it, that it's taking that initial step to start doing this from doing other things that is the biggest hurdle, isn't it? And once people get past that, actually, yes, there's a lot of hard slog, and sometimes there's a lot of good luck and all sorts of other things involved, but it's taking that step in the first place, isn't it? That's the big push. There's a question in the chat for you, Nikki, from Stu, who says, my question is for Nikki. Look What You Made Me Do has a jaw-dropping twist at the end. Did you craft the book around that idea, or did it come to you as you were writing the book?
Oh, hi, Stu. Lovely to see you here. I actually, for this particular one, for All in Her Head, it was different. I had the idea and the twist very much from the beginning, but for this one, it kind of came to me as I was writing. So probably quite early on in the story, but it's not something I kind of thought of right from the start. I kind of changed things around slightly to add that in at the end.
Excellent, thank you. Moving on from that question then, this is something that we've covered a few times today, and in fact lots of people were surprised this morning by the answers that the members of the crime panel gave to this. So I'm going to ask you the same thing, and that is, with your novels, do you plot them in advance or do you make it up as you go along? Penny.
I'm in between. I'm a bit of a fence sitter. I need to have my inciting incident. I need to know what that is. I need to have had a grasp of the characters and an idea of where it's going, a sort of beginning, middle and end. But I certainly, I'm not one of these people that has a big board with loads of post-it notes on and has plotted out every chapter and things. And with my 2 novels, actually, the endings have both changed in rewrites. So what I thought was going to happen didn't. It changed to be something which actually was a lot better. So I think I've got great respect for people like Philip Pullman, who can just have a idea for an opening image for a page and can sit down and write it. I can't do that. But on the other side, I need to be writing it and getting to know the characters, and for them to sort of almost, although it sounds a bit odd, for them to almost tell me where they want it to go whilst I'm writing. But it does help to have a beginning, a middle and an end in mind.
Philippa, the wall behind you looks like it has lots of post-it notes on it. It could be in the same way that the theme music for Inspector Morse gives you clues, just a bit of Morse code to say something about your next book, or it could be something else entirely. Do you plot or do you not?
Yes, what's behind me is definitely a bit of a red herring when it comes to the whole plotting versus pantsing thing. What you can see behind me is my 3rd attempt to work out a plot for book 3 that ultimately also failed, and that book 3 has now been shelved. So I'm always trying to plot, and I do write outlines partly for my agent and editor so they can see what I'm aiming to do. But quite similar to what Penny says, a lot of the time the plot for me comes from the characters. So I have to write a lot on the page to get to know my characters before I can figure out how the plot is going to go. And it's a really inefficient process. All the books that I've written so far have required massive page 1 rewrites, and I really wish they didn't. I wish I could get the story to come together in the way that I want and need it to first time, but it just seems to take me a long time to figure out what kind of story I'm trying to tell. And if I were just to make the plot up first and then fit the characters into it, I just don't think it would work for me. I think I would feel that my characters were not particularly authentic and not operating psychologically how people really operate. So I often where my books go wrong is the plot isn't working properly in my initial drafts, and often what I end up having to do a lot of work on in my rewrites is get a plot that is interesting enough so that I haven't just written characters flailing around having emotional dramas in their own heads, basically. So yeah, that's the challenge for me. So I sometimes describe myself as a pantser with a plotter inside trying to get out.
Emma, do you plot?
No, short answer is I have attempted to plot and failed at it. I mean, I think what happens to me, certainly with the 2 books that I've written, I've had a very clear idea at the start about the main character and what happens to that character. So I know how it begins and ends, but have genuinely no clue about what happens in the middle. With The Silent Daughter, my first book, it was initially set in Guatemala and Mexico and involved the drugs wars there. It's now based in Edinburgh. There's no drugs wars, but the character is essentially the same. So I mean, you talk about rewrites. I think that's a biggie. And what often happens to me once I start to write is that certain scenes will appear in my head, and I have the really bad habit of just dropping anything else that I'm doing and writing that scene. So at the end of maybe two months, I've got a whole bunch of scenes that don't really join together, and then I enter what I call the Tetris stage, and it's just trying to fit them together somehow. And it's the weirdest thing is that sometimes, you know, there's this, like a scene will come into my head, I'll write it, and I just like, I can see no way that it's even connected to the book that I'm writing. And then like 2 days before I'm due to submit it, I'll go, oh, that's why there was sellotape in the drawer, you know, and it's just like, how did that happen? I have no idea. But so I just, again, like Philippa, I mean, I would like to be more efficient, but I tend to just write what comes into my head and trust that somehow, eventually, usually at about 3 a.m, my brain works out the way to join them all together.
Nikki, what about you?
Well, I think I'm more of a plotter than, but I definitely write in a linear fashion. So unlike Emma, I can't do kind of scenes all over the place. I have to write the story kind of as it's going. But I've just seen Stu's question about what's the most important aspect of your novel's, character or plot. And for me, I think character is the most important. So although I might have a plot, or I have to start with a plot, I have to kind of think, you know, I've got the beginning, the middle and the end, and probably a little bit more than that, I'd say. I definitely write it in a linear fashion. I always know that I'm going to end up writing the book twice effectively, because it's telling me the story, and it's getting to know my characters. And then the second time or more, as we all know, it's kind of fleshing out all those characters and making sure that how well I know them once I've written that first draft. It's kind of going back and putting all that in from the beginning so that their characters kind of appear how I want them from the start, because often I find that they're just a bit too kind of flat and wooden. I mean, the first couple of chapters are usually kind of fine. I like writing prologues in the beginning, but then it can all kind of, you know, unhinge itself slightly depending on what's happening plot wise. So I kind of have to know the story all the way through, and then I can kind of go back and kind of flesh it all out and work out where I'm going to kind of change it and things like that. So yeah, I think I'm more of a plotter.
I'll just throw Stu's question from the chat. Do anyone else who has a question, do drop them in the chat window. Throw this one to everyone else as well. Penny, what do you think is the most important aspect for you in novels, character or plot?
Well, you do need both, certainly. Literary novels tend to be more character than the plot, and I think when people are reading suspense, you need a jolly good plot with your cliffhangers and your red herrings and things. But as a writer, I'm much more interested in the characters. As I said earlier, the plot, the crime, is more of a something to happen, so we can see how those characters react to it and what their emotions are and how they behave afterwards. So yeah, I definitely think it's more character, because I do have a problem with novels where characters fit the plot rather than the plot fitting the characters, I think, and that's something that I always try very hard to avoid.
It's difficult, isn't it, to get into a novel if you can't identify with at least one character on one level somehow, or sympathise with one character somehow. If all of your characters are horrendous, then it's very difficult to engage with the book.
I think you don't have to like them, but there's got to be something about them that makes you actually want to find out what happens to them. So you might hate them so much that you want to keep reading on so they get their comeuppance, or they might be a terrible person and there's just you see just a chink in there of humanity. So you're wondering, are they going to change? Are they going to be on a journey or whatever? But yes, you have to care. If you don't care about any of the characters, then you're just going to stop reading.
Yeah.
And I want my readers to carry on to the end.
Yeah, it's a very good point, isn't it? Philippa, what about you? Which is more important for you, character or plot?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I would echo what Penny's just said, and Nikki. And I wonder, it would be interesting to hear from you, Mark, what your authors on your crime panel said, because it's interesting for me hearing that we all, as psychological suspense authors, are focusing on character. I mean, maybe the clue is in the genre psychological, right? That's about people. So yeah, I think that characters definitely come first. And just like Penny said, it's what I'm interested in is how do characters react and respond to the events that we throw at them. And I think taking it even a step further, that combination of character and plot creates your theme or your point of view in your book. So how your characters deal with the situations that they're in, and in psychological thrillers or psychological suspense books, they're often quite extreme situations. You as the author are in a sense making commentary on human beings, how they should behave, how they do behave, how we hope that they behave, how we fail to behave, all of these kind of things. And I think that when plot and character come together really well, you have a book that makes you think or gives you some sort of insight into human nature or human psychology, or how humans operate in the world. So yeah, and I think that if you just have a plot that's like a puzzle to be solved, that can be fun and that can be interesting, but I think it doesn't have that extra level.
Yeah, we didn't cover so much with the crime panel the character plot difference, but we did cover the plotting versus just writing. I was interested to know about the kind of mechanism that the crime writers used to plot. You know, how did they plan out where the clues were going to be, what was going to be a red herring, you know, and what structure to follow. And without fail, all three authors in the crime panel this morning made it up as they went along, essentially. They didn't do the step-by-step plot that you would naturally expect for a crime writer, which was a surprise to a lot of people, possibly not to the authors themselves, but certainly to the readers, that they didn't follow that meticulous route that perhaps the detective has to follow in unpicking all of those things when you go back the other way. Emma, what about you? Character-driven, plot-driven, what's most important for you?
Definitely character as well. I mean, I think with both of my books, I've had the character in my head. I know what happens to them, but I haven't yet built the world or the story around them, and that's the sort of the plot part, which definitely comes second for me. But at the same time, there's a brilliant book called The Science of Storytelling, and Will Storr is the author, I think, and he says, you know, if you develop your character well, if you've got a convincing character, they will only react in one particular way to any event. And so he sort of says, as you move through a book, whether it's someone like waiting in a queue in a shop, or someone encountering, you know, something very dramatic like a murder or a car crash or something, they'll actually react in a very similar way. So he says, once you've got your character, you know, nailed, the rest of the plot should just actually unfold naturally, because this person can only react in the way that they genuinely would, if that kind of makes sense. And he even encourages writers to go back and look at every decision made by the characters in every chapter to see if they are following this sort of central belief system that they have. And it's absolutely fascinating if you sort of apply it to your own books and say, you know, would Chris Morrison, for example, my protagonist in The Silent Daughter, would Chris do this in this scene when in this other scene he reacted in this way? I mean, for me, it's definitely character all the way, and really they're the ones who drive the plot, because they have to react in a certain way if they're well developed.
Yeah, looking at it from the reader perspective, Louise says in the chat, I think as a reader, the characterization is so important to keep you reading. If not a good character, this would definitely put me off, and it would develop the plot on its own. Stu agrees, character is important as a reader. So yeah, it should probably come as no surprise that you've answered in the way you have. Nikki says, as Penny said earlier, you may be engaged with the character because you despise them or are curious about them rather than liking them. Plot is secondary. And there's an interesting point I think you made actually, Penny, as well, about the need to see a bad character get their comeuppance in some way by the end of the plot. If you've got a particularly bad character, you don't want them to succeed on any level. You want them to fail horribly or die trying or whatever, and you need to see that, don't you? There's a question from Michelle, which I'm going to come to in just a moment, but before I do, thinking about that character and plot whole thing, and the genre that you're writing in, I'd be interested to hear from all of you. Let's start with Nikki this time. You're writing psychological thriller / suspense, depending on how you want to look at it. How do you create and develop that idea of suspense in your writing?
Oh, that's a good question. And I don't know. I don't think it necessarily comes with the first draft. I can say that. I think it's I think when I have to be really kind of concentrating on what I'm writing, and because sometimes I can write, you know, a first draft and I'll do a page, and I think we probably all recognize this, where you just feel, oh yeah, somebody going along and doing whatever, and it just doesn't feel suspenseful or whatever at all. So you've got to kind of, I think you've got to know your characters inside out, and how they'd react to things, what they'd find scary, and what worries them, and what makes them nervous, and, you know, a full kind of background picture, not that's necessarily in your novel at all, but just, you know, inside your head, you need to know that. And maybe that's where the kind of suspense comes from, is kind of taking all of those aspects and having kind of an authority when you write. I think that you really understand your character and what motivates them, what drives them and things, and what is going to worry them, and then you can kind of create the suspense in the particular scene.
Emma, but what about you? How do you create that aura of suspense in your writing?
For me, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Do you know, I was just thinking as Nikki was speaking, I think I do the opposite. I quite often, it's hilarious, I'm writing away, bum, 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 and I get to the end of a chapter, and then I go, oh! And I honestly can't believe something's just happened. I'm like, you know, and I have no idea where it comes from, and I don't exactly know, you know, and you know, I say, and then they open the door, and I'm like, what is behind that door? I have no idea. And so, like, I feel like my knowledge of the characters comes from sort of by writing these scenes and seeing how they react. I get to know them better, rather than writing them knowing how they would already react, if you know what I mean. I mean, that's a tricky one. I think in my first draft, I definitely have the tendency to be melodramatic. And in fact, my editor did say, you know, I sort of kept holding things back from the reader, but it was too much. You know, at the end of every scene, it was like, and then they opened the door and they saw, ... and then the next chapter. And so I had to sort of revise that and do, you know, have a bit more style about how I kept things from the reader. But again, quite often with me, I find that it just kind of, the suspense just kind of happens as the story starts taking hold, you know, and the characters, I don't know, they start sort of moving around their world, and I know what they're looking for, you know, I know what they're trying to reach, and it's just sort of letting them discover that and seeing where the story takes them. And I know it's probably a very unsatisfying answer, because there is no real trick to it, certainly in my experience. It just, I think the suspense element can definitely be revised and improved and made more subtle in later drafts, but in the initial draft, I just kind of go with the flow and see what happens. And quite often at the end of a chapter, if it isn't dramatic and it doesn't make me gasp, I'll just say, make this more dramatic in capital letters and move on to the next chapter, basically.
Philippa, what do you do? Do you scare yourself?
Sometimes I have that experience like Emma, where I'll kind of get to the sort of, you know, moment, or what, I can't remember who it was, but someone was talking about, you want to try and end your scene at the point where you can imagine the EastEnders drums coming in. You know, that's always a good place to stop the scene or the chapter. So sometimes when I get that right, I'm like, yes. It's such a great question, Michelle, and I was just as Penny and Emma were talking, Nikki and Emma were talking, I was trying to think, yeah, how do we create suspense in this genre? Because in a sense, when we read any book, we want to know what's going to happen. Like, that's kind of why we carry on reading. But I guess in the suspense genre, there's a number of things. One is probably that your inciting incident is a kind of event that immediately makes the reader think, holy crap, what's going to happen now? You know, it's not just an everyday event like in perhaps, you know, romance, where it's two people meeting, and you might be really intrigued to see how their relationship pans out, but it's not so much a moment where you think, oh my God, what the hell would you do? So I think partly it's the inciting, the kind of inciting incident that you have in the suspense genre. It's often, you know, someone's gone missing, or you get an email out of the blue from a friend that, you know, you have a deep, dark secret with, or, you know, a big secret comes to light at the beginning of the book, or there's some sort of jeopardy at the beginning of the book. So there's the inciting incident, which creates that real sense of, oh my God, what's going to happen now? There's also a little bit like Emma was saying, there's something about the timing of when you reveal information. And I did a mentorship with a amazing author called Judith Alnett, and she, when working on my draft for Little White Lies, she asked me to draw up a spreadsheet, and one of the columns in the spreadsheet was, as you went through your scenes, what question are you putting in the reader's mind at this point, and then when do you answer that question? So what you want is that the reader, as they're reading, every scene also is opening up a new question, like, you know, who is that, or what's that about, or what, how does that fit in, or who is that they're referring to, or I'm pretty sure that they're not telling me something about that. So constant raising of questions in the reader's mind and answering them, but leaving the right length of gap between when you raise the question and when you answer it. And when you answer one question, you want to make sure you've raised another, you know, either just before that or around the same time, so that the reader's got another question they want to read on for. And then I think the third thing that I was thinking about is, again, a real convention of this genre, is that you you present a question to the reader at whatever point in the book. You then drop some clues so that the reader thinks they know the direction that the story is going in. They have a sense of, oh, I know what this is all about. And then you present a reveal, or the classic twist, which is when you kind of you zig and then you zag for the reader. So you reveal some information, or you make something happen which really upends what we thought was happening in the story. So again, the reader suddenly thinks, oh my gosh, again, what's going on? And I think, again, the inciting incident combined, oh, I've got more ideas now. The unreliable narrator as well is another classic version of suspense, because it's like, what can we trust? What do we not know? What do we know? What are we not being told? And if you put all of that together, particularly along with an inciting incident that's quite dramatic, you also create a sense of jeopardy, a sense of threat or danger, which is also part of suspense. It's that sense of not knowing what's going to happen next, not knowing where the danger is coming from, not knowing if we can trust what we're being told. So, wow, I didn't think I had so many thoughts on that, but there you go.
You totally did. Penny, do you make a conscious decision to try and introduce suspense? How do you do it? Or does it just kind of happen as you're writing?
I think part of it happens organically as you get to know your characters and what their secrets are, what motivates them, what they would be scared of. With their secrets, you don't want to reveal them all at the same time. So you perhaps sort of stretch it out throughout the plot. Technically, I tend to have quite short chapters. A lot of readers, they like to perhaps read 1 or 2 chapters before bed, and I like to end my chapters with something that makes people want to read the next one. So it might be, yeah, there'll be the typical cliffhanger sort of thing to make you read on. But also I think there's important to have light and shades. You can't have too much suspense. You can't have everything that's always so tense and nervous. It will just wear you out. So you need the light where characters think they might have got away with it, or think that what was troubling them has just gone away. If they're being stalked, for example, they think that person stopped now and everything's safe and they can breathe. And the reader can think that too. And then suddenly the cliffhanger might be, and she spots that person outside her house again. So I think definitely light and shade, and short chapters, cliffhangers, red herrings. And then when I've got a version I'm happy with of the novel, then I'll go back and might put some more twists or little clues there, sort of looking backwards to make sure that it all works properly. So definitely a lot goes on in the edit as well.
Yeah, I think that light and shade is important, as you say, whether that light comes through comedy or through black humor or just through a letting up in events occasionally, it is important, isn't it? So there you go. Philippa's surprised herself with the amount of things that she realised she had in her head, which is good. Michelle in the chat has said that she's totally going to make a question and answer spreadsheet for her current work in progress, so that's good as well. And in fact, Michelle asks as well, talking about the chat and writing, which she is doing at the moment, and this question is for everybody, so you can all pitch in with this one. What's your ideas to complete story ratio? Number of ideas, number of complete stories. Do you have loads of ideas and flutter about them all, or do you have fewer and focus on one through to the end? Anybody can take that first as it comes to you.
I'd say I definitely don't have a lot of ideas. I know some of my friends who are authors seem to come up with tons of ideas almost on a weekly basis, but I'm definitely not like that. I have a few ideas, very few ideas, because I think I dismiss a lot of them quite quickly because I just don't believe that they're going to work, or I don't think they're going to work for me. And then every now and again, I'll get one that kind of doesn't go away. And if I can keep remembering it and keep thinking about it, then that's usually a sign that it's probably good enough to at least kind of start thinking about writing a book about it.
Anybody else got a good idea to story ratio?
I've got lots and lots of ideas. I'm thinking of new ones every day, really, but they're not all sustainable. And I get any idea and think, oh, I want to write about that. And then I think, no, I've got to stick to what I'm working on. I mean, certainly with my book 3, I'm on my 3rd different idea now, because I'm quite good at thinking of the original scenario and the characters, but that scenario has got to be sustained through 80,000 words. And so I start writing and then I think, you know, it's a good incident, but how can I carry this on? So I don't think that's going to work. So I think, well, I'll park that. It's on my computer. If I think of more ideas in the future, I'll go back to it to see how I can stretch it out. But yes, I think it's quite easy for me to think of an idea, but it's very hard actually plotting it out and making it last to a whole book.
Emma?
Yeah, no, I think I have quite a lot of ideas, but most of them are not that good. And I think most of them are not really stories. Like at the moment, I'm quite obsessed with the Spanish Industrial Revolution. And I'm like, my next book, I'm going to face it in the early 1900s in Spain. And I'm like, that's not actually a story. That's the background of a story, but I don't actually have a story within that. So I quite often I'll hear something on the news or I'll read something in a magazine or whatever, and think, oh, that would make a great story, you know, and I maybe note it down. I do try to sort of keep a note of all these ideas. But like Penny says, you know, when you actually sit down and think, how would this work as a novel? It's a different thing. So, I mean, what I did actually a few days ago, I sat with a big piece of paper and just wrote down every single idea that I've had over the past few months. So I'm trying to create a pitch for my next book at the moment. And, you know, just came up with, I didn't sort of, when my brain said that's a terrible idea, I just wrote it down anyway. And so I've got like probably 60 or 70 different potential ideas. And then I sort of looked at them all together and thought, can these fit together in any way? You know, is there something there, some underlying theme that's maybe, you know, that I'm being pulled towards or not? And I'm just going to kind of sit on it for a few days or weeks and see if my brain manages to mush any of them together and actually find the story. But I think it can be quite a challenge to identify, you know, is this a setting? Is this a theme? Or is this, what is the actual story that I'm trying to tell? It's much harder than one would imagine. And to be honest, I think I didn't know what story. With the current one, you know, I've written probably 150 or 160,000 words in total. And I think it wasn't until I'd written about 100,000 words that I realised what the story was actually about, you know, and that's a bizarre feeling as well, to think, you know, not really being entirely sure, you know, from the original idea where the actual story is going to go. But again, that's because I don't plan. I don't know how Philippa feels about that. I'm not sure.
I don't know. Philippa, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I mean, my ideas to completed story ratio is, yeah, probably similar. I probably have a fair number of ideas, but like Nikki was saying, I probably dismiss a lot of them quite quickly because I just think, no, I'm not interested in that, or that wouldn't work. And I think, again, a bit like Penny was saying, if you're going to write an 80,000 word book, you need more than one idea. I tend to find that I can picture or visualize a whole book when I've maybe got 2 or 3 key ideas that I can weave together somehow. But Emma makes a really good point about when we talk about ideas, sometimes those ideas are settings, sometimes they're characters, sometimes they're, single scenes, sometimes they're plot points. And when I was grappling with my book 3, this one that, it's a mess on the wall behind me and's been shelved, I was talking about it with some of these guys because I was really stuck. And it has a great hook. And Emma said, and I was like, oh, it's so good. It's like such a great starting point for the story. And Emma said, yeah, but the problem is that's a setting, not an inciting incident. You don't have an inciting incident. And I was like, oh my God, she's right. I've been trying to write a 90,000 word novel with no inciting incident. No wonder it's not working. So yeah, it's been, I think sometimes it's working out basically my advice would be don't mistake a setting for an inciting incident if you can help it.
Excellent. We are getting quite close to time. Let's just give people an opportunity to ask any final questions that they have. In the meantime, let me just ask you all, who as an author inspires you in your genre? Who do you read within your own genre and why?
Shall I go first?
Go for it. Yeah, it's open to all.
Okay. I mean, I read loads of other kind of psychological thriller writers, and lots of people inspire me. But recently, I think I have read Anna Bailey's new book, Tall Bones, which I thought was fantastic and utterly fantastic, annoyingly fantastic, actually. So yeah, that's one I love. Lisa Jewell's books, I love. Gillian McAllister, I read all of hers. And yeah, I mean, these guys here, I've read all their books and loved them. So yeah, I think I read as widely as I can, just so that you can kind of keep on top of kind of market trends, what's out there, and what ideas other people have had, and how they kind of construct their books. That's what I find really interesting. How do they do it to keep people interested?
Oh, yeah, I mean, my big inspirations are Gillian Flynn, as I mentioned before. A couple of other contemporary writers that I've really enjoyed are Araminta Hall, Jane Shemilt, and also I have to say I love Nikki, Penny, and Emma's books as well. They're all great. So these guys, in many ways, are my inspiration. I often just feel like I'm trying to keep up with them, basically.
Emma has had to plug her phone in because it's getting low on battery so that she can recharge it, which means she can't actually hear us at the moment. So we can all see that she's there, but I can't ask her this question directly at the moment. So Penny, what about you? Who do you read?
I'll join the love in. I think, yeah, Emma, Philippa's and Nikki's books are all great and sort of really exciting to have such talented peers and be part of that group. Lisa Jewell, I also like reading. Ruth Ware, Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. I mean, that is just the gold standard. It's absolutely fantastic. And I also love Sarah Waters' books. They're not sort of really within the suspense genre totally, but stuff like Fingersmith and what have you. I mean, they're brilliant. I think she's so talented, and the way she can construct a plot with all that tension and suspense. Yes, she's amazing too.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Emma is almost with us once again. We'll just give her a moment to plug her ears back in. There we go. Just in the nick of time, Emma. Who inspires you from within your own genre? Who do you read and why?
Do you know, my agent is always telling me that I need to read more science fiction because I actually mainly read non-fiction. I normally read historical books because I'm a tour guide in my other world. But in terms of who I love in science fiction, I would say as Philippa said, Gone Girl I found massively inspiring, and since I became published, I've mainly been reading books by fellow debuts, such as Philippa's books and Penny's book and Nikki's books. So there's not really one standout writer that I follow. I don't tend to read lots of books by the same person. I'm very fickle. I like to sort of read one book and then discover someone else. I mean, my to-read list is so massive. I would say growing up, I was very influenced by William McIlvanney. His great Scottish writer. He's not science fiction, but just his writing in general absolutely inspired me. And I actually read a lot of Dick Francis. I was quite obsessed with Dick Francis actually as I was growing up, which is also not science fiction. So I'm maybe a little bit unusual in that I don't really have a particular favourite, to be honest. I'm a lover of all different kinds of genres and books, and I think it's definitely it would be of benefit to me to read more books in my genre to see how it's done, see how other people are doing it. And I do really love reading, all the books of all the panelists are absolutely brilliant. And my agent has said to me countless times over the past 10 years, read more books in your own genre. So perhaps this will be the year that I do it, who knows.
Okay, one final question, because we're going to have to wrap this up in just a second. This question is from Alice, and I know people have been answering this in the chat as well, but I'm going to answer it in public audio form so that people who watch this back later on can get the same answers or possibly completely different ones. And Alice asked if you could all give one tip for getting published, your best tip for getting published. So very briefly, one idea from each of you for those people who would like to get published but are not currently so. Nikki.
I think I put Alice in the chat. See if you can find an author who is prepared to mentor you. I think that that's incredibly helpful, or it was for me. And also I would say I'm quite an impatient person, and don't submit too early, because you only get one chance really with that particular book to submit to agents, and if it's not ready, then you've kind of written off your chance before you've started. So hang on to it for as long as you can, and make it absolutely the best that you can kind of get it before you submit to agents. That would be my advice.
Penny, one tip from you.
Develop a thick skin. There is a lot of rejection when it comes to getting published, but don't take it too personally. It doesn't mean that your book is rubbish. It might be that the agent or the publishers, they've already doing something similar, or they haven't got, they've filled their list for this year. So keep going. Also, I think that, gosh, I had another idea and it's completely gone out of my head. That just keep trying, and you'll get there. Don't give up.
Emma, what about you?
Yeah, the word I would say, persevere, persevere, persevere. It took me almost a decade. I've written 3 books before my debut got published. I'd had about 4,500 rejections. And the truth is, it only takes one, and when the offer came in, my dream came true. 10 years, it was actually 10 years to the day from the day I quit my job as a news reporter. I got my book deal. It was quite bizarre, the 15th of December. And never give up. As Penny said, just persevere, keep going, keep trying, write more books, and you might just get there in the end.
I just thought of what I was going to say, and that went out of my head. It was that if agents get back to you and say, and give you some sort of criticism, that's brilliant, because a lot of agents will just give you a standard no. So if they do give you some advice, work on it, say thank you, and be pleased that they've actually cared enough about what you've written to give you some feedback.
That's a very good point. And finally, Philippa.
Yeah, I'll subsume a few things under my one tip, which is aim to become an expert in the field. If you want to be a published author, then you need to know more and be better than just a random person on the street when it comes to books and writing. So you don't have to be the expert in the field, obviously, but try to become an expert. And that means read a lot. So read the books that are coming out, read the contemporary fiction, read widely, read deeply, get to know the landscape of published books. Learn your craft as a writer, study story techniques, study writing craft, learn the techniques that will help you tell your story in the best way that it can. So the same way as a plumber needs to learn the skills of their trade, learn the skills of your trade. And however you do that, through books or courses or listening to things like this, whatever you want to do. Get feedback on your work. You can't become better and you can't become your best without people's feedback on where you can improve and what's working and what's not. So if you want to become an expert in the field, you need to work with other people who are going to give you feedback on your writing, so that you're not just thinking that you're writing great when actually there's plenty of ways to write better. And finally, research the publishing industry. You do not need connections in the publishing industry. You absolutely don't. But what you should do is try to learn about the publishing industry, research how to submit to agents, research, what agents are looking for and how to write a cover letter and how to submit. Same way as if you were applying for a job, you would research what you need to know for a job interview. You would research what you need to put on your CV. You would research the department or industry that you were applying to. So there's no excuse for you can not know things, that's fine, but there's not really any excuse for not trying to find out the answers. There's so much information out there. So try to become an expert in the field. Put the work in.
Thank you very much. All great tips from everybody there. Thank you all very much for those and for your time in coming along today. Before I wrap this panel up, I would invite everybody in the audience to please show your appreciation in the chat to Penny, Philippa, Nikki and Emma, our suspense panel for today. Thank you.